All right, everyone, I'm gonna first start off by introducing Elena Gross, my wonderful colleague. So Elena is the exhibitions associate here at MoAD and an independent writer and art critic. She specializes in representations of identity in fine art, photography, and popular media. Her most recent research has been centered around conceptual and material abstractions of the body and the work of Black modern and contemporary artists. She has presented her writing and research at institutions and conferences across the US, including the Nook Gallery, Southern Exposure, Catered, Harvard College, YBCA, California College of the Arts, and the GLBT History Museum. I also want to add that she is the manager for the Emerging Arts Program, so what you see on the walls in this room is all thanks to her. All right, Elena Gross.
Hello. For this panel, it's going to be a conversation between myself and two of our esteemed guests, Dario Calmese and Tyler Mitchell. And so I'm just going to read their bios really quickly, and then you guys can come up here and join me. So I'm going to start with Dario. Dario Calmese is an artist, writer, director, and brand consultant currently based in New York City. He received his master's in photography from the School of Visual Arts and his bachelor's degree in psychology at Rockhurst University in Kansas City. His artistic works have been shown both nationally and internationally at Aperture Gallery New York, Jack Shainman, National Museum of Turkmenistan. Dario serves on the advisory board of the museum at FIT and is a former Ideas City Fellow at the New Museum in New York City. He is a contributing writer for the Huffington Post, the Daily Beast, and the Business of Fashion, and is currently an NYC Urban Design Forum Fellow. Most recently, Dario curated Fashioning the Black Body, and his show direction for the fashion brand Pyre Moss was hailed in the New York Times as the best show of Fashion Month. So, welcome, Dario. Next, we have Tyler Mitchell. Tyler Mitchell is a photographer and filmmaker based in Brooklyn, working across many genres to explore and document a new aesthetic of Blackness. Mitchell is regularly published in avant-garde magazines and commissioned by prominent fashion houses. In 2018, he made history as the first Black photographer to shoot a cover of American Vogue for Beyoncé's appearance in the September issue. In 2019, a portrait from this series was acquired by the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery for its permanent collection. This, alongside many other accomplishments, has established Mitchell as one of the most closely watched up-and-coming talents in photography today. His first solo presentation, I Can Make You Feel Good, at Foam Photography Museum, Amsterdam, premiered video works including Idyllic Space. Selected publications include American Vogue, British Vogue, Teen Vogue, M. Le Monde, ID Magazine, and Other Magazine, Dazed Magazine, Document Journal, The Guardian, and The Fader. So welcome, Tyler. So we just got started talking about a few things over in the corner, and so I think I just want to pick up basically where we left off. I mean, I guess I'll start with a specific question, which I kind of told you I was going to lead with, which is that something I'm always interested in with photographers is how they came to the medium, with photography being still a very young medium, but that's always that's constantly growing and evolving pretty rapidly right now in our society. I'm really interested to hear what your first relationship to the camera, to the medium of photography, and to looking at images is. So either of you can start.
Yeah, sure, I'll start. Thank you, MoAD, for having me. Thank you, Dario. Dario and I know each other through actually Pierre Moss in a way, through Kirby and through just friends in New York. And it's really nice to be here in the Bay Area. To answer your question, came to photography mainly through social media and Tumblr. Just growing up and kind of being surrounded by images by, colorful, sensuous and beautiful photographers on social media like Ryan McGinley, Larry Clark, Petra Collins. A lot of the inspirations around me through the internet primarily brought me to wanting to make images, but it was also skateboarding. I was a skateboarder, and a lot of my friends would, they would film each other, and we would kind of all film just ourselves really as a group, and we'd want to upload these montages of ourselves skateboarding around Atlanta, Georgia, where I'm from. And eventually my friend brought a DSLR camera, and of course it has a video mode, which you can flip over to, and then it has a pictures mode, which you can flip over to. And so we would just all share this DSLR camera that he had purchased, and I became so obsessed with uploading these stylized montages of my friends. And yeah, that's essentially how I arrived at the medium. But then I also had a weird resurgence with it so that got me thinking about wanting to move to New York City, wanting to go to film school, which I got my undergrad BFA at NYU Tisch for film and TV, actually, and did study under Deborah Willis during my 4 years there. But when I got there was a photographer actually from London. At that point, I was getting deeper and deeper into my relationship with Instagram and with social media as a way to reach out to other creative people. And I reached out to a photographer on Instagram who takes pictures under the title Places Plus Faces. He always photographs rappers backstage in like these intimate ways, and I was so fascinated with how he got these moments with like some of our generation's greatest artists. And I was like, if you are in New York and you want a place to stay, you can stay in my dorm room, like my small dorm room. And so in offering that to him, he was like, sure, yeah, why not? He brought me along with him on his like adventures in New York, photographing Drake and a lot of different rappers that he was photographing. And so I would just watch him and I would kind of copy him eventually. I was like, I really like that camera you have. What's that camera? And he had a small Yashica film camera. And so then I started to get more invested in also taking pictures on analog, on 35 millimeter and on film. So now all of my work is analog, and he kind of started that shift.
My beginning in photography is pretty quotidian and pedestrian. I essentially, I was an actor at the time, and I was taking a trip to Europe, and I essentially just wanted to take pretty pictures of the Eiffel Tower to make a calendar for my mother. Like, that was it. And because traveling around prior to that, like I just had like a little point and shoot, and I would always share my pictures with my grandmother. I would take pictures of the signs when I was in the Caribbean, and like, oh, I walked up this street. And so it was really sharing where I had been. And I was talking to them earlier. For some reason in my head, I always thought that I had to make a choice between academics or art. And so I was, studying psychology, but I was also, studying theater. I thought they were siloed. And then when I took this camera over to Europe and just kind of figured out, lighting ratios, time, all of these things, I realized through this medium I could actually combine these two minds, my analytical, nerdy geekiness, and then actually create something creative. And so I was still acting, taking pictures of my friends, not really thinking much of it, and just finding that I wanted to express more and more inside of this frame. I kept hitting creative walls and rules, and I was, a bit of a rebel, and I was like, no, I want to do this. And so that's really my intro into photography and storytelling.
I think something that is interesting to me about both of your stories is obviously the not linear paths you kind of came into photography with, and how, Tyler, you began with this interest in skateboarding and documenting your friends to become to film school, essentially then to becoming a photographer. Dario as an actor, academic to photographer. And it just makes me think of the ways that you both, and so many of us, because we don't live singular lives, obviously, have these multivalent kind of creative practices. And how do you feel like that has, what are the benefits of being kind of nimble and open in that way about your practices and about the mediums that you work within?
I think the beauty is that now, especially young folks and in the age of social media, we're able to just naturally, inherently be fluent in everything we do. So, whether for me it was the worlds of music or fashion or art or, all of these different sectors that used to be very siloed, like Dario was saying, those to me were never that was never the case. It was never that I would separate the experiences that I might have had with my friends skateboarding and say that's completely different genre-wise than what I would photograph or try to get from a model. That same kind of collaboration and intimacy that I would have with my friends would be the same I would approach with a celebrity, with a friend, with a model, so for me that crossover was always like second nature. It was always kind of in my blood. It was always I had so many different interests growing up, so there was never anything that I wasn't curious about in terms of who I wanted to photograph or what I wanted to photograph or what context I wanted my work to exist in. So
I think for me it's really about the ability to problem solve, and particularly problem solve in a way in which you want to express something. So for me, each medium that I kind of work with gives me access to a new set of tools, a new set of storytelling tools.
I realized there were images I should have been clicking through. Keep going,
no,
please.
So, an image, a photographic image, allows me to say one thing, but then if I want to write, it allows me to be more narrative in the way in which I present something. So this thing that's happening all the way over here and this thing that's happening all the way over there, I can use language and words to actually weave and put these things together so I can take you along for the ride. So for me, it's great, and it allows me to just work in multiple ways or say multiple things. So for like the Pierre Moss show, in directing a fashion show, in a way it brings together so many things, right? So there's a research element that I use for the shows, but then I'm using my performance background, right, to actually put on this production. I have an understanding of, stage lighting and blocking and runway, but then I also work in fashion, so I understand that the clothes need to be present. But then I play piano and I sing and I dance, so I can hire all of the singers. I can do the arrangements of the songs, all of these things. So it's a way to be nimble and actually make new combinations of things that stand out.
It's a way. It seems like it's a way for you to bring your full self to whatever it is you're doing, which I think there's something very important about, especially with images of Black people, and not seeing Black subjects as singular objects, essentially, as seeing them as these. I think there's a way in which, obviously, we talk. When you talk about the history of Black subjects in photography is often fetishized or objectified in certain ways. And I think something that is present in both of your works is this more expansive idea of the kind of the way you turn your lens on your subjects. It allows for something more expansive in the way we approach the subject. So I would be curious to hear, one, how you what your take is on that, but then also what your relationship is to your models, and to the person who sits for you. How do you think about them as full beings, as well as what the image will ultimately look like when it's done being taken?
Yeah, I think actually Deb Willis actually wrote a small blurb about my work that she just kind of emailed over to me, and I, unprompted, was completely blown away by all her words. So I'll use her quote, is that she said, she just sent it. She was like, I wrote this. And she said that, Tyler often allows his subjects to expand his ideas of what making a good portrait is, or what that looks like. And there's a clear collaboration there. And she was speaking specifically about my video with Beyonce, which felt and very much made reference to, home videos of the 50s. It was very much about this family sensibility, which was truly the energy on the day of the set. I'm deeply collaborative with the people I photograph, and I'm always kind of allowing their ideas to expand what we might make that day. And I think going in with that, just that open-mindedness changes already the images you come away with. But also that process to me feels like a distinctly younger approach in a way of a photographer. But thinking about what you said, Elena, about this multivalent kind of experience, and also bringing in all that we are into what we do. My favorite photographers often do the same thing again and again and again, even if they're photographing 30 different things. I mean, Gordon Parks, photographs all over the world, but you still see his eye somehow, and he has this singular approach to 30,000 different subject matters, seemingly, and I think that might be my favorite thing about being able to be a photographer and an image maker today, is whether it's Oh wait, what are we flipping through here?
Oh, I'm just flipping through the images.
This is great.
Sorry.
These are some images from my exhibition in Amsterdam, but whether it's approaching films that I make or whether it's approaching families and thinking about intimacy and togetherness, and whether this was actually produced on a photo shoot or whether it's Beyonce, there's still a sensibility and a sensitivity and a captivatingly poetic glance or a gaze that I'm kind of looking for out of my subjects. So thinking about that multivalent or that diverse experience we bring into the photograph, all of my favorite photographers have this same thing they seem to be after.
What was the question?
Sorry.
I guess another way of frame is what can you speak to kind of your relationship to your sitters and what that process is like of both the way you see them, obviously, as you know they show up on set that day as a fully realized human being, and thinking about that when you go to take the picture.
My process is more, and maybe Deb can speak to it because I photographed her. I definitely come in with ideas, right? And I do a lot of research and a lot of reference. So, for example,
Go back to Deb's picture.
maybe actually go back one. Yeah, here. So it's something that I learned in grad school. So I'm a recovering perfectionist, and I realized that, and in all of the planning, you can't plan everything out, right? Or the images end up a little lifeless, or at least mine did. And so I leave just a little bit of life to happen. So every time I step on set, I'm actually not really sure exactly what's going to happen. But I believe that you have to build a playground in order to play. Like, you just can't show up to the field and, like, let's just see what happens. So I do build a bit of a playground. So for this image, Numero told me that they wanted to do something about America. That was just the theme. That's all I had. And so I'm thinking America, South America, North America, Native Americans, what do I want to say? How do I, and also being a photographer and image maker, I do find it an opportunity to what I call burden the crown, right? So what do I want to put out there that is going to challenge a narrative or maybe instruct or educate? So as I was thinking of America, in America, all I could think about was the labor of Black women. Like, all I could think about was how this country would not exist without the labor of Black women. So I was like, okay, cool. So the subject is, I got to do Black women. And so I found models of varying hues, and I don't know how many of you all are familiar with the artist and actor Jeffrey Holder, but I inherited his book collection, and so I'm always going through his book collection for references. So in it is an Ebony magazine, Pictorial History of the United States or something. It's like a volume. So I'm going through these volumes, and I'm looking through them and looking at hairstyles, right? Because this is my inspiration for that. And so that's actually where I, found these hairstyles and gave them to the hair artist, whatever. On set, I'm talking with the models about what I'm thinking about. They're looking through the books. We're in my studio. And so this is, for me, a portrait of America, and a portrait of America that we don't always see. And then the image on the right, yeah, you're right. You're right. I was thinking about the ways in which we see but don't see Black women, right? So this kind of Du Boisian double consciousness, and how the gaze is both, how do I want to say it? The gaze is liminal, so it's one, what you're projecting, and then also how you're seen. So just wanting to use photography as a way to show how we can maybe image Black women, but we don't ever quite really see them. And so that's how the other image came about.
So I think that answer kind of is a nice segue into another question that I want to kind of talk about a bit in terms. So it's been a few decades now since Dr. Deb Willis's book "Picturing Us: African American Identity and Photography," and since the Black Male exhibition at the Whitney, curated by Thelma Golden, both of which seem important to reflect on as Black men, for you both as Black men creating images right now, oftentimes of other Black men as well. So how would you say you've seen representations of Black men, Black masculinity, Black malehood shift since, I don't know, the early 90s at least? We won't go back to the beginning of history. That's a different talk. But do you see your work as in part an exercise in kind of reimagining what these representations of Black masculinity can look like in the contemporary?
Short answer, yes. Long answer, it only when I got to NYU did I realize that this work was being done by people like Deb and Thelma 20 years before the idea even dawned on me. But it was so, you first have that thought as someone who wants to make images and wants to make art that, okay, this isn't a wholly new idea. But that's actually a beautiful and a freeing thing, I think, because we're operating within an amazing legacy of thinkers and artists, filmmakers, photographers, and image makers who are already opening up those doors for me to just continue. You know what I mean? So it's not about this new idea, or it's not about something that is plucked, and has dawned on me and has not dawned on anybody else. It's actually about extending this legacy through what I have around me, through my friends and my community, and bringing the sensibility that I have to how I envision a Black man should be or shouldn't be. Do you know what I mean? Or just opening up those ideas. So for me, growing up, that was always inherent to how I was and how I carried myself in Atlanta. Just being in this body, I knew that I really didn't consider all of the rules and constructs around being a Black man that I was raised with to be valuable or important. And I kind of really wanted to dismantle those. So for me, in my work, there's kind of a second nature approach to both gender and and I say that in terms of I would like for the people in my photographs to exist in their own world, to feel strong and to feel kind of captivatingly poetic, and to not almost be confronted with these constructs. Like you see a certain strength in their sensitivity. Yeah, that's kind of.
Yeah.
How have I seen it change?
Or shift.
I mean, just outside of my own work, I've definitely seen levels of romance and the sacred feminine being injected into the images of Black men, which I think is wonderful. In my own work,
I'm gonna go back to this one.
Billy.
Yeah.
This was one of those you just don't know what's gonna happen until you get on set, until you see the dresses, and then I'm like, oh, we should add this, and even on his head, I'm looking, I'm like, there's something missing, and this is actually a blazer that I wrapped around his head and it's like a McQueen blazer, and I was like, this is work. That's what we need. We need a pop of color at the top. But actually, if you go back or forward.
Forward.
Back. No. That one, yeah. So, in my personal work, what I'm really always after is simply beauty, really unabashedly that, and in looking at my work in relationship to other photographers, particularly photographers who look at the Black male body, if you're thinking like a Mapplethorpe or something like that, really repositioning the Black body and the Black male body as an object of beauty, and something almost meditative and even spiritual. And because I'm not showing faces and really abstracting even the gaze, so you don't even really know exactly what you're looking at. All that you know is that it's maybe a Black person, and that it's beautiful and that it's human. You don't even know what part of the human, but that's all you can walk away with, right? Is black, beautiful human, and that's it. You know, if you add a face, if you add all these other things, then people can come with all of their projections, but by stripping that away, all you're left are with these really basic reductive elements, which I find fun and cool. And,
Even as they're reductive elements, they're adding something. They're giving you like the viewer so much more space to imagine and more possibility in a way.
Yeah, for sure.
That's I find that really interesting because it like and I really like that point because I guess in my approach I've always tried to really capture the face in the portrait. So I've never actually considered that a portrait could be reductive, or I always saw it as something that could unlock, you know, limitless possibilities. And I thought, but I guess again this might have to do with not sure, background, the images that were inspiring me. I always felt like seeing somebody's face at rest for me, or seeing a black person's face at rest and kind of comfortable within themselves felt really special to me always. And I think about movies like Moonlight or Beale Street, who are so gorgeous when there's those moments where it's just the character and the lens. That also feels like a way of comforting. But I really love this image because it's doing the same thing but without any face in it, you know.
So I think both of you, I can kind of see some of the things that you are both very drawn to in your image. Obviously the face, and in your case, this kind of abstracted flesh, this kind of abstracted body. Are there specific images or types of images that you try to avoid in your work? That you are there specific conversations you're not interested actually in having in the way you photograph specifically black subjects? Should I elaborate on what? Okay, so my thinking here is that I think there is a lot of conversation about, and there has been, I think, just in art history, specifically within black art history, about what kinds of works constitute what black art should be: positive representation, negative representation. There are certain ways that images we see of blackness in the media a lot of the times, like being overwhelmed with these images of black people being brutalized, perhaps, or murdered by police, or things of that nature. I suppose there's so many different types of stories that I think people expect you to tell with images, and expect people come to black images and black art in general with certain expectations of what it should look like and what it should do. And I'm not interested in that. And I'm curious as to what kinds of conversations you're not interested perhaps in having in your work. I don't know why, but that seems like a interesting question for me.
Well, I'm definitely not interested in like black pain or suffering or oppression. That is not where I create from at all. And you know, and in moving forward, you know, as a community, as a culture, you know, I think those, not that those stories should be ignored. We've told those stories, but for me, I'm very much more interested in, okay, so yes, and now what? Like, what are you going to create with that pain or with that oppression? And so as far as what I'm interested in or not interested in, I'm definitely not interested in this fetishization of, you know, black pain. Like, and I find that particularly in the art space, if you're not talking about how bad white people have been to you, like, they're not very interested in having a conversation. And what's really underneath that is like a centering of whiteness, right? It's like, it's saying like, I still need to be a part of this story, and I don't see myself in this story, and so I can't appreciate this, or
I can't engage with it.
Yeah, exactly. I have no entry point into discussing this work because I can't see myself in it, and that's not my problem.
No, it's not.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off that, exactly, it's not. You know, I always, when asked sometimes, I always say that my work's not really a counter-narrative at all, but it's more of a self-contained world. And that's kind of how I decide to look at it, and whether you want to, you know, see yourself in that or don't, or if you like it or don't, that's for you. And a lot of the work that I'm doing is really about viewing and bringing in my community, bringing in friends that I want to photograph or people on social media or just the folks around, and kind of placing them in a more positive light in a way. But yeah, this idea of utopia that I'm really focused on, and the name of my show being I Can Make You Feel Good, there's definitely, yeah, we can go through some of the images. And this is an install shot from Amsterdam. This is a video piece called Idyllic Space, and I was really interested in creating this ceiling mounted video, but also this slightly therapeutic feeling space, where you can just lie down on these beanbags and dream and let these images just wash over you. The images themselves are images I made in Atlanta of friends kind of enjoying seemingly mundane or banal suburban pleasures, eating ice cream, hula hooping, you can see here, jump roping, skateboarding, just being free. There's this one image I love so much of this boy just kind of floating out the top of this car driving through the suburbs in Georgia. And all those images, you kind of lay down on these beanbags and just allow them really to wash over you. And I've created this mini environment, this mini safe space with kind of this amazing music scored by my friend. And so I think, again, this idea of self-contained utopia is more interesting to me than a counter narrative or what are you not interested in talking about? You know what I mean? Because I think it's more about what are we interested in pushing forward with the images we're making, and how can images kind of be a prophecy for what we want to bring into reality, because I do consider myself in a way a bit of a cultural prophet. These images that we're making can bring, and I mean that seriously, I think these images can bring together realities and conversations that are, real results, and that's what images do. So,
yeah, and I think it's amazing that you say you're a cultural prophet, because I'm always thinking about how can images be something that is generative, the photograph, even Roland Barthes and Sontag, they speak about the photograph at the moment that it's taken, it automatically becomes an effigy, right? You're actually killing the person by taking that photograph, and so it's always backwards looking. But how can we use this frame, thinking about it architecturally, right, as a built environment, to suggest something more generative or something that is future looking? So I think that your work definitely totally captures that, these beautiful, colorful, romantic worlds, and mine is kind of creepy, but it's fun. I'm looking wow, a little creepy.
I want to pivot a little bit and talk about some of your commercial work, your work in specifically within the realms of fashion photography. I think something that's really interesting about that kind of work is the fact that it doesn't live within the white cube. It lives often, or it can, but one of the things that I think is really interesting about it is that it can live within, literally within the culture, within the pages of a magazine that anyone can pick up anywhere, or within your phone, within these devices, within spaces like Instagram or Tumblr, which is also how I first came to discovering many of the images that have been really impactful for me. So I was just wondering if you could talk about what it's like to kind of see your work as both something that's kind of mobile and also something that is, it's literally part of the culture in the sense that it is more it's more accessible to us in very personal and tactile ways than what you necessarily see in a gallery space. What is that like for you?
I've never been particularly interested by only existing in white cube space. I love the ideas that are able to come about in physical space. I love the conversations with so many amazing smart thinkers and amazing people that are in this room and rooms similar. But I think in terms of images, photographs, those are meant to be disseminated widely, right? That's why photography was invented. That's my interest in photography. Those are the images I grew up looking at, were widely disseminated images of people I looked up to, of celebrities, to be honest with you. And I've always been interested in that. I've always been interested in pop culture. So for me, the entry point was always that. So I lean into this idea of a fashion commission being an amazing space for social change, and also being an amazing space for, speaking about these ideas of identity and dress and the body and the black body. So a lot of the work does that, whether that's using symbols of dress and kind of subverting how we might expect a young black man to be dressed, the scenarios I'm putting them in, the kind of cinematic environments where they're at play, either at rest or moving through space. All of these symbols, I think, are a nice, I like Dario's word at the playground, like it's all a recipe to kind of, again, create my world and how I would like to see the folks around me. So this idea of the fashion commission or how people in art might look down on that, or vice versa, fashion look down on art, I think it's all a part of, these things do different things. The white cube space does one thing, the fashion space does another thing, and both can kind of work to, in my work, support that, so.
You know, I actually don't much think about my work living like in the digital plane. But I will say that because I started doing commissioned fashion work maybe just last year, starting with that numero cover and now with Billy Porter and Vanity Fair. And for me, coming back into this fashion space as a photographer, I actually find it kind of challenging, actually, to really push, you know, a vision, because I'm really always trying to say more than they will let me say, right? Because I'm always being subjected to, you know, a team, and we have to get these fashion credits, and we can't mix this with that because Gucci will be mad if we put the Saint Laurent in the shot. Like, and I'm just like, what? Like, I don't know what you're talking about. So we could go back to like maybe like the Billy Porter image. Yeah. So like this image originally, like the image that I wanted was actually Billy, and there's another image, but we removed him. But I brought a dancer on set, and so it was actually a pietà.
Oh, wow.
So there was like a half-naked dancer in a dance belt who was laying on the ground, and Billy was actually dragging him, almost like, and his head was like I was trying. I was trying at Vanity Fair, and they just let me play. So I was like, okay, we're just gonna play. And so they ended up going with this image. And so for me, which is, you know, beautiful, and Bill looks great in it, and, you know, I play with the styling and all of this stuff. But for me, it's always this constant like, but I want to say all of this. And so I find that in the art space, and when I say art, I'm not thinking like on a white gallery wall, but a place of pure free creativity. That's where I really can find rest and peace, because otherwise I feel like I'm having to answer to all of these other people, you know, with their own agendas, and the image that I have in my head, or the image that I wanted to create, is reduced. I'm just gonna say reduced. Reduced because of maybe the strength of the messages that I actually really want to say. But I'm, you know, grateful to work with these teams. And funny enough, when they saw all of these like random images, you know, with Billy with this dancer's legs around him in pink tights and like, you know, a rainbow mink, like all this shit.
I want to see this contact sheet. Like, I want to see the outtakes of this shoot.
I have them on my phone. I'll show you.
Please.
But it was interesting because the photo editors actually called me in for a meeting afterwards, because they were like, although we cannot publish these, we've never seen images like this, and we want to like know more about you. So it was interesting. So it actually allowed me greater access just in the play, but knowing that they wouldn't be published. But I'll go back and say, I remember when I was in grad school, Tim Walker came to speak with us, who's an amazing, you know, fashion photographer. And he said, when you're shooting, think about the final destination, meaning like, do you want it on a gallery wall? Do you want it here? And shoot for that, because it's always going to go through all of these iterations, and you're going to be pissed, right? They're going to put it in the magazine. They're going to choose, you know, the shittiest image. They're going to put a gutter right through your image. It's going to be printed on shitty paper. The blacks won't be black enough. Like, forget that. Like, those are just byways, right, of the image. But where do you see the image living? And so I've always kept that in the back of my mind as well.
How are we doing on time? of this part? Okay. Sorry.
I think to quickly
yeah.
respond to that though, sorry, before.
No, yeah, go for it.
Because I really like the idea of shooting for the intended space, and I think that makes me think about social media, and again, just how much of an impact it genuinely has had on my work, and subconsciously, just at least in what I'm doing, the simplified compositions, the bold colors, the vibrant colors, all of that must have subconsciously been a response to a lot of the images I like just from my phone. And those are the things that read well on phones, and those are the things that performed well on phones. And so those were also the images I was drawn to. And so I'm naturally like putting those back out into the world, or I'm creating with that in mind. To me, like in a weird way, the magazine was never something I was like particularly focused on either. Like it was always the phone or the computer. And listen, like that's a huge way we consume images now, and images are becoming so important in our culture via our phones. So
sometimes you see it on Instagram before you see the actual physical cover. Yeah.
And it's amazing now having all of that interest, but then being able to do these museum shows and being able to consider the materiality of images again, or again for the first time also. And thinking about Deborah Willis's work and her, thinking about family album photos, those photos have been touched. They have thumbprints on them. They have their corners worn. They're placed in albums. They're presented, and that materiality becomes a specific, and I think as important as the image itself, way of presenting it. And I love these vernacular forms of presenting images. I love how that can also push a certain social message. And so I don't have an image of it here, but in my show currently up in New York, we have started to kind of install these laundry lines and do dye sublimation prints on different fabrics that I was sourcing from the garment district, and returning a lot of the images which felt already inherently like pieces of fabric to that material. The images, they already have lots of fabric in them. They have this idea of a poetic kind of, not sure, it's just that motion, it's just a vibe thing. But to return it to that subject matter, again, when I think about shoot for what you're trying to do, or shoot for your intended kind of presentation of the work, I've been playing so much with materiality in a really fun way, and I've been reading a lot about how the materiality in the form can actually boost or add to the content of an image and push a social message in an amazing way. And I think all my favorite photographers really understand that.
I think I'm going to ask just one last question, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. Just checking that I am allowed to do that. I want to talk a little bit about both of your very iconic magazine covers. Tyler being the first African-American photographer to shoot for Vogue on the September issue, for Beyonce's September issue. Dario, your cover of Billy Porter for Vanity Fair, and I believe you were the first. Are you I think he said in an interview with the first Black gay photographer who's ever photographed him for a magazine cover, or something like that.
Yeah, I remember when he came in. So me and Anatoly, who's a stylist, he came in and he was like, I have waited my whole life to walk on set and to see you.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And which I think is incredibly powerful. Both of those things, but it's both incredible and it's also galling in certain ways that even, in 2018, 2019, 2020, Black artists, Black people really are still experiencing their firsts. And so I'm just wondering, I guess, where both of you, having now had some of your firsts, what barriers you think are still left within these industries that you hope to see or expect to see or plan to challenge yourself? And who are people, what types of people and creatives are you excited to see more of as these barriers get broken down?
I mean, look, there's a lot of people we could start with, but we have to continue to open it up. That's what we have to do. We have to continue to break down the floodgates, and why there are so many firsts are neither anyone on this panel or in this room. I think it's not our responsibility to answer that in a way. Do you know what I mean? But I think to continue to push forward and open it up for the people around us, I think is the most important part. And I think I'm not seeing enough people in these producerial roles, or kind of, we talk about the idea of the boardroom, or, even when I'm looking for a team, or when I'm looking, you know what I mean? It's like, it's scarce out here.
Yeah.
So we have to do a lot of this, bringing people together and then talking about this and then doing the work. And that's what I think is super important, I think. And giving each other jobs.
Yeah.
Look, so.
Yeah, I mean, everything that Tyler said is it. I think it's so important that we just continue to have more decision makers that look like us, to be in places to see others. I also was like a casting director. I'm like a Jamaican, I've been
Had 20 jobs.
Yeah, 20 jobs.
Right, and then brand consultant, which I was like, I want to do that. How do you do that? Because how do you even become like the brand whisperer?
Yeah.
Yeah. But just understanding the importance of having us at the table to make a decision. Working with Pierre Moss, I see a model come in, and I look at her and I'm like, oh, she's giving me like fabulous 1970s auntie vibes. Like, she's gonna be amazing. And so, let's put her in the show. And I think about how many times even myself or any of us have walked into rooms and there hasn't been anyone on the other side of the table to like see us, right? To like actually see us past whatever. They have no stories. We do not conjure any memories for them. And so it's not necessarily about them being necessarily racist or them or hating black people or anything like that. It's like they have no memories to draw from when they see us. So they have to do so much work just to like hire us, because they have to get to know us, right? So they're just gonna go with what feels familiar. And so I think it's, again, just more important that we are in places where we can see each other, as we get jobs and work with clients, that we bring on other people, that I bring on this makeup artist or have this assistant. So so that we can continue to build memories, right? So that we don't feel so unfamiliar. So yeah, I think that's it.
That was fantastic. Thank you.
Shit, okay.
Yeah. So now I want to open it up to questions, and I see one right here in the third row. Please, the floor is yours.
My name is Maya. I'm a teaching artist here at MoAD. I particularly teach third grade, and even more particularly, I teach the hands-on art class in this very room with the third graders. And something that I have a really hard time with is their obsession with perfection. I actually have two questions. One is for Dario and one is for Tyler. This one is for you, Dario, because you said you were a recovering perfectionist. Yeah, it's really difficult to get through to them that perfection is boring. I literally make them say perfection is boring altogether with me. But I think particularly with like my black students is this idea that you need to be better than the best, and there's this obsession with perfection. And so I was wondering if there's any concrete action steps that you've taken as a recovering perfectionist, particularly like any like inner child work that you've done to like disrupt that idea, that cycle.
So I'm still in my recovery phase, so this could be triggering. No, I'm kidding. I think for me the solution is just to do, right? To do and learn as I go along. Like that's my constant challenge, is to just put it out there. I think that it is, at least for me, I can speak for myself, understanding the difference between preparation and perfectionism. One has to be prepared in order to enter whatever space you find yourself in, so that you feel confident. And I think it's really a matter of confidence, right? Because what it's really about is control, and you're trying to control the world around you. And just realizing that you can't. And what instead of like perfection, all I'm really trying to do is get closer and closer to creating the images in my head. But I do believe creating from a place of honesty. You know, my images are like not heavily retouched. You know, if you have a scar, you have a scar. If you were in a bad mood that day, that reads in the image. Like, I'm not trying to reach for perfection in that way, like in an ideal way. But again, just doing, like, and realizing like nobody cares. Like, nobody cares. Like, nobody cares. You think everybody's looking and caring, and they don't give a fuck. Like, it's like, just put it out there, and you can perfect it or refine it as you go along. Yeah. I hope that helps.
It did. And then my question for Tyler was just wanting to know more. There's a particular photo that you took, and I think it's in the I Can Make You Feel Good.
Is it in this?
Exhibition.
All right,
It's
I'm
the,
going.
Portrait. It's a family in front of the American flag. One of my favorite photos of yours. I've been thinking about it since I saw it last week. And when I saw it, I immediately thought of Asada's a poem she wrote where she mentions we are pregnant with freedom. And then also just thinking about the panel we heard earlier about Kathleen Cleaver's like family archive, and there was a mention of the event of photography. I was just wondering if the event of this photo, because I can't stop thinking about this photo.
Yeah, this was produced on a fashion shoot that I kind of had carte blanche to do, you know, what I wanted in a way. This magazine approached me and they were like, "What would you like to do?" And I said, "I want to do something with a lot of my friends, a big group. We're gonna go. We're gonna take a van of clothes. Don't ask me what we're gonna do. I really want to think about intimacy and family, and you know, I want to produce images that feel like family photographs." But I love the idea of this fantasy because they're in these kind of cautious, orange, bright, almost like cautionary vests and jumpsuits. And it's a bit spacey and scary in a way. And so there's this, you know, with the whole idea with I Can Make You Feel Good was I'm very interested in the mundane and in, you know, family and these things that are very kind of domestic and sweet in a way and fantastical, but also there's kind of a sense of danger. This image was produced in Howard Beach, Queens, which, if anyone's familiar with the area, has a, you know, very contentious history with race riots and with a particular murder in the 80s that was very problematic, despite it being, you know, in New York and in a metropolis and whatever. There was a whole vibe when we went out there with these tattered American flags and quite a few Trump signs and, you know, all the rest. And it felt so important to make this image of, you know, a black family unit with the delicateness of holding the two twin babies. And this is a real family. My friend Tyra and her two twin babies and her partner, Naeem. And so just taking that reality, heightening it a little bit with this sense of the American flag in the back, bringing forward these questions of what an American, you know, an all-American family portrait looks like, but also imbuing it with this sense of like, there is a bit of a sense of danger as well. It's a semi-sweet between utopia and between imagined utopia, which, you know, also for me, images are these things that are also, when you frame them and then you kind of situate them in a way. In my show specifically, it's 60 by 80, huge, kind of framed. You also can't really access it, right? You can't touch it. It's a bit larger than life, and there's a wall between you and the image. So.
You just over there? Yeah. You.
I noticed that you talk a lot about like Instagram and like your influence. This is for Tyler. And like growing up with Tumblr, I'm a millennial and I grew up with Tumblr, and I was like very like as a creative, I'm just always looking at images, and I think as a person of color and obviously as a black person, like images for us is like so important, and it kind of like sets culture, right? Like, and when I talk to people that aren't my age, like in the same age group, they're always like, why do you spend so much time on Instagram? Or like, why are photos so important to you? Why is this film so important to you? Why is this image so important to you? And I think there's this debate on Instagram being like bad for you, or like can it actually like influence you differently? But from what I'm hearing from you, it's actually influenced you very productively, and it's helped your art like kind of move forward, especially like because you reached out to this person and this social media app, and there's just so much talk around like social media not being good for you, or but I use it in the same way that you use it because I meet a lot of creators through it. Yeah, like what do you have to? How do you handle that? Do you get a lot of people telling you like, why do you create for Instagram?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's undeniable for me, and it's like one of those things where it's almost like a Basquiat approach, where you lay a bunch of books out around the studio, and the images just start to soak in and start to influence the work. And I think, I mean, they absolutely, the idea of social media in our culture today is a bigger question, one that I can't entirely tackle, or else y'all want to stay here for 48 hours or something like that. But as much as it does affect a lot of people's mental health, I've somehow found a way to also, use it to benefit and inspire. And there's the exciting thing for me is when I look at my phone, I don't look at it as this thing that's very, trapping or inhibiting or kind of pushing certain ideas onto me. I look at it as this thing that allows me access to generations of information, to hundreds of thousands of images. And I used to read something crazy that Kanye West would wake up and look at 1,000 images a day. So for like a year in like 2014 and 15, I was falling asleep with my phone in my hand and was just trying to look at images and really understand how valuable they were or are going to be increasingly, to our culture. And Basquiat, another like interesting theory that Arthur Jaffa has is that, with so much of the black church in America being, Protestant or Baptist, there's so much of an emphasis placed on hymn and song. But with someone like Basquiat being Catholic, he understood images instinctively. So I'm also like interested in this theory that, just how can our upbringings, not only through the church, but as people, as black folks bound up with religion, how can we kind of understand iconography, through our upbringing, through our history as well? So what kind of cultural things am I bringing when I look at an image? So I understand an image to be a very important thing symbolically, and I think our culture is also, understanding that as well as Instagram becomes so pervasive. But for me, yeah, it's ultimately inspiration, and it's ultimately something to kind of feed back into my work. So.
Ask it.
Since you guys have both shot iconic covers and you're now essentially, you have made Black history, do you guys feel that pressure to keep elevating and continuing to be a part of, like, I'm the first African American to do this, to do that? Like, do you feel that pressure to continue to keep elevating?
Yes. I'd be lying if I said no. Yes.
No.
It's good to be honest with ourselves.
Yeah, no.
Not.
Does either of you want to elaborate on that?
Wait, yeah. elaborate.
The reason I say why not, the reason I say no, I don't, I'm really not concerned about what other people think. And so if I happen to be the first African American to do this or the first black gay dude to do that, like that's just in a way happenstance. And I'm grateful for those opportunities, but I think my responsibility is to continue to stay honest, and to keep putting the images or fashion shows or messages or articles that I want into the world and where they land, in the physical plane or in, the fabric of history really doesn't have much to do with me. But I do believe that like my responsibility is to be honest, and but I'm not unaware that my presence in these spaces is not weighted. So I'm also not going in there ignorant of the fact that I may be the only access that these people have had to like a black person, So yeah. I understand the weight, but I don't carry it.
I think it goes back to, I guess, what you were saying earlier is it's not your problem.
Right. Yeah. But I'm responsible, but it's not my problem.
Right. Yeah.
of my control, I should say.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good way of putting it. I think I answered yes in a way. I was having a conversation with Amy Sherrill, and we were talking about our experiences with, her doing the presidential portrait, and then suddenly having this responsibility, to make a ton of appearances, talks, things that she had never experienced in her life, which are similar to, my experience. And so we were bonding over that, and I was like, look, I had the same thing you did. We have to go and do these talks, and we have to do, this responsibility that
You're here.
you hadn't. Yeah, no, and I mean, I really like speaking about my work, and I really also like just sharing and being able to be in conversation with people in rooms like these. It's not that I don't like it, but it's that responsibility is definitely heightened. So for me, I do feel that pressure, and I think to answer that, as honestly as I can, I would say yes. But I think Amy and I were just sharing, and one thing she said to me that I think a lot about is that over the past year, 2 years since, that huge moment happened for the both of us, what she said was, she was like, I really don't feel bad anymore about saying no. And so I've tried to take that into what I'm doing. Yeah.
Do we have time for one more question? All right.
Hi, Chanel. I'm a photographer.
You're sitting in her exhibition.
So I wanted to ask this question. I wrote it down to kind of like keep it together a bit, but I was thinking like as we move through the fight for Black representation in art and publication, and we begin to see more Black faces, how do you to protect the intent and messaging of your visual narratives from the commodification of Blackness being used solely as a vehicle for profit? Because it seems like it's of interest right now, right? But you guys are working in commercial spaces where it could feel like, are they just using Black faces because it's trendy right now? Or like, so how do you protect your own intent and like messaging with your work from, other forces that you can't like?
I think that's been the biggest amount of, that's been the thing that's caused me the biggest amount of mental and physical energy, has been protecting all the things that I feel very close to my heart and that I want to safeguard. And those are the people I photograph, those are their spirits, those are my spirit, my emotional energy. And so again, going back to saying no, and basically being ruthless in a way, when working in these commission spaces especially, you know when it feels wrong. You know when that exchange starts to feel like it's not protecting the spirit or the intent of what you're trying to make. And so I think anytime that boundaries cross, my gut knows and I know, and then I say no. And I love your work, by the way.
How do I protect the things that I hold dear? It's interesting because I actually shoot at least commercially, like a wide range of subjects. So I just shot for the New York Times, shot Matthew Lopez, who wrote The Inheritance, so I'm not, protecting much there. I have some stuff coming out in Vanity Fair with, white London dude and whatever. So I'm not necessarily thinking about protecting in that way. But to answer your question about like these moments or this seeming moment, right? This commodification of Blackness. I think it's important, one, to work with people that you know and that you love and that you trust. I think it's important, again, that we bring our friends and those people that we hold dear on set with us. I'm going to talk about something. I went to a reading last week of Toni Morrison's A Source of Self-Regard with Felicia Rashad and Andre Holland reading it. And it was really wonderful. It was really sweet. The tickets were like $45 or $50. It only lasted like 40 minutes. And I walked away with this kind of residue. It was at the 92nd Street Y. And I was like, yeah, how can we protect our creativity and our art from the world of commerce and capitalism, right? Like, this theater was filled, and it was filled with other black and brown people who were there to hear black and brown people read the words of this black and brown prophet. And there was, and the theater made all of this money off of it, and none of it goes back into our community. So it's, in a way, it's a bit tough. It's a bit tough, particularly when you're no longer here to protect your things. And I think in that regard, it kind of goes back to the importance of having curators and writers and image makers to not only collect and cherish and preserve, but to also record new collective memories for us as we think back on our lives, as we rethink and reimagine what Blackness is and was and what will be. I think it's incumbent on all of us to continue to just show up and to do our work and to research. But it's tough because when you do not own the distribution channels, you can't. Yeah, it slips from your fingers. You know, Ava DuVernay, speaks about not only being a director and a producer, but she's opening like her own movie theaters, right? Because she's like, I have to control the entire channel, right? So from the imaging to the distribution, right? Because as it goes through these channels, it starts to wear at the edges, right? It starts to wear at the edges, and they start to become facsimiles or filtered through the eyes and lens of people who cannot see or feel the very thing that you're trying to do. And so I think these are the important things, and I'm going to stop talking in a second. But I also think that it's important, again, that we stay honest and imbue the things that we create with our ness, right? With us, so that they can't be diluted. For example, the work that I do with Pierre Moss, I've seen Michael Kors try to copy it, and Business of Fashion try to copy it, and like all these people try to copy it, and it's like, you're missing the point. Like, it's not about a choir, right? Like, you don't have the juice, right? It's coming from, like, it's coming from an essence. It's coming from our histories and our love for ourselves. So you'll never actually even be able to touch it. You can try to copy it and mimic it all you want to, but you're missing the thing. Like, so why don't you delve into yourself and, put some people out here in, kilts with bagpipes, and maybe it'll feel a little more authentic. But, if we... Why they give me a mic? Why did they give me a mic? But so yes, there's no really solid answer except to just to be as honest and as rooted in your spirit as possible. Like that's the way, that Tony's words, even though this theater made all the these dollars off of this moment, that they still can be a change agent in the world. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Thank you. So I think that concludes the panel. Thank you so much for listening and for all of your fantastic questions. I'm going to turn it over now to Dimitri.
Thank you, Professor Watts. All right, well, first of all, I want to thank everyone, all of our panelists, for participating today. Again, we could not do this without you guys and ladies. This was amazing. I just want to point out that on the bottom of your program, there is a link to a survey. It's a Survey Monkey. There's only 8 very short questions. We would love to hear from you, hear what you liked about this, what you didn't like about it, what you want to see next time, so we can keep making this symposium something that's relevant to our community. I also want to point you to tomorrow, for those of you who are still in town. We have some visitors here. There's a panel discussion for Black is Beautiful, the photography of Kwame Brathwaite, and it is from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock. And let me see, it's a panel discussion between Brathwaite's son, Kwame S. Brathwaite, right here, and two of the contributors of Aperture's exhibition catalog, culture critic and author Tanisha C. Ford, and photographer, curator, and author Deborah Willis. The panel will be moderated by Mark Bamuti Joseph, a spoken word poet, dancer, and playwright. Last couple of things. Downstairs, we have the last Black bookstore in San Francisco. Please show your support of it. It's not sad. We're excited about it, actually. So please support our bookstore. All of our panelists have work in it, whether it's their work or work that they have photographs within. What am I missing? Also, I want to remind everyone that events like this, all of our public programs, all of our education programs that we do like over 70 public programs a year. We have over 1,500 kids who come into the museum for free every single year. That's all because of our members. So if you are not a member of MoAD, I'm gonna urge you one last time, think about opening a membership for MoAD. If you wanna see more of these symposiums, you wanna see more education, you wanna see more Blackness in San Francisco, that's one way you can do it. Again, thank you so much to everyone.